The scent of crushed pine needles and ceremonial incense hung thick in the air, a nauseating combination that clung to my skin like a warning. I kept my eyes downcast, counting the intricate patterns on the marble floor, anything to avoid catching unwanted attention as the presentation ceremony continued around me. 37 tiles from where I stood to the nearest exit. I had counted them every month for 8 years. The great hall of the Northern Pack pulsed with anticipation, voices rising and falling like a tide of expectations I could never meet. Young Omegas fluttered around in their ceremonial white dresses, nervous giggles punctuating the solemn atmosphere as they practiced their introduction speeches. Their scents, sweet, alluring, designed by nature to attract, wafted through the hall, a stark contrast to the suppressants I had carefully applied to my glands that morning. "Lyra, stand up straight," Mrs. Holloway hissed, tugging at the shoulders of my simple gray dress, the uniform of the service staff I had hidden among for nearly a decade. "Just because you're different doesn't mean you should slouch like a commoner." Different. That was the word the pack used for me. The mute Omega, the broken one. The girl who hadn't spoken a single word since the night her family was slaughtered by rival wolves. They pitied me. But pity served me well. It kept me invisible. It kept me unclaimed. My fingers instinctively reached for the small wooden pendant hanging from a leather cord around my neck. My mother's last gift. The intricate carving of a wolf howling at the moon was worn smooth from years of my anxious touch. "Words are power," she had whispered the night before she died. "Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to hold them back." She couldn't have known how literally I would take that lesson. A sudden hush fell over the hall, and I felt it before I heard it. The collective intake of breath, the subtle shift in energy, the way every wolf in the room seemed to straighten imperceptibly. He had arrived. Alpha King Callum Blackwood entered without fanfare, without announcement. He didn't need one. His presence commanded attention, a force of nature in human form. At 32, he had ruled the United Northern Packs for 5 years with uncompromising authority. Rumors of his cruelty toward enemies were matched only by stories of his fierce protection of those under his rule. I had glimpsed him from afar at previous ceremonies, but today he seemed different, more focused, his jaw set in determination. I kept my head down, hands trembling slightly as I arranged crystal glasses on a serving tray. 8 years of pretending, of silencing not just my voice, but my very nature. I couldn't falter now. Every Omega was required to be presented at these monthly ceremonies once they turned 18, giving their ceremonial speech before the Alpha and his council, officially entering the claiming pool. Every Omega, except me. My disability had earned me a rare exemption. "Begin the presentations," Elder Miriam announced, her voice cutting through the tension. One by one, young Omegas approached the ceremonial circle, their voices shaking as they recited the ancient words, "I offer my loyalty, my strength, and my future to the pack. May the moon goddess guide me to my rightful place." Some added personal touches, mentions of special skills or familial connections, subtle ways to increase their appeal to potential mates. I moved silently among the guests, refilling glasses, clearing plates, a ghost in a room full of predators. This was the role I had perfected, useful but unnoticed, present but overlooked. "You there?" A deep voice cut through my concentration. The water pitcher. I froze, eyes still downcast, before realizing the command was directed at me. Slowly, I approached the main table where Alpha Callum sat with his council, extending the silver pitcher toward his empty glass. This close, his scent was overwhelming. Pine forests after rain, smoke from a winter fire. Something primal and untamed that made my carefully suppressed Omega instincts stir uncomfortably. I poured with practiced precision, but as I turned to leave, his hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my wrist. The touch sent an electric current through my body, and I had to bite my tongue to prevent a gasp from escaping. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. 8 years of survival instincts screamed at me to keep my eyes down, but the Alpha's command was impossible to resist. Slowly, I raised my gaze to meet his. His eyes were not what I expected. I had imagined cold calculation, perhaps cruel indifference. Instead, I found intensity and something that looked unsettlingly like recognition. Dark amber irises ringed with gold seemed to look past every barrier I had carefully constructed. "What's your name?" he asked, his thumb absently tracing circles on the inside of my wrist where my pulse hammered traitorously. Mrs. Holloway appeared at my side, a nervous smile plastered on her face. "Forgive her, Alpha King. This is Lyra. She works in the kitchens. She's unable to speak. Trauma. From the Western Pack massacre," something flickered across his face. Surprise. Then calculation. "The Western Pack massacre was 8 years ago." "Yes, Alpha." She hasn't spoken a word since. Poor thing. Mrs. Holloway's fake sympathy made my stomach turn. He released my wrist, but his eyes never left mine. "Interesting. And how old are you, Lyra?" Mrs. Holloway answered for me again. 26, Alpha King." His eyebrow arched slightly. 26 and unmated? Unusual for an Omega. Her condition makes her unsuitable for claiming, Elder Miriam interjected from further down the table. The council granted an exemption from the presentation ceremony. I could feel sweat beating at the nape of my neck. In 8 years, no one had ever questioned my status this directly, least of all the Alpha King himself. "Unsuitable," he repeated, the word hanging dangerously in the air between us. I don't believe I've ever met an unsuitable Omega. I took a step back, clutching the picture to my chest like a shield. "Return to your duties," he finally said, dismissing me with a slight wave of his hand. I retreated, heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone in the hall could hear it. Something had changed. The careful invisibility I had maintained for years suddenly felt paper-thin. The ceremony continued, but I could feel his eyes following me around the room. When the formal presentations ended and the social hour began, I slipped out through the servants' entrance, desperate for air that wasn't saturated with his scent. The courtyard was empty, moonlight painting the ancient stones in silver. I leaned against a pillar, allowing myself one shuddering breath after another. Just one more hour, then I could return to my small room in the servants' quarters, and the ceremony would be over for another month. "It's quite a performance," a voice said from the shadows. I whirled around, the pitcher slipping from my fingers and shattering on the stone. Alpha Callum stood at the entrance to the courtyard, his massive frame silhouetted against the light from the hall. 8 years without speaking," he continued, stepping closer. "That requires remarkable discipline, or desperation." I backed away, my shoulder blades pressing against cold stone as he approached. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "The thing is," he said, now close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, "I've been investigating the Western Pack massacre. Strange coincidence that the only survivor happens to be here, in my territory, hiding among my staff." His hand reached up, and I flinched, but he merely tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture incongruously gentle. "What are you hiding from, little wolf?" he whispered, his breath warm against my cheek. Or should I ask, who are you hiding from? My heart hammered against my ribs, panic clawing at my throat. I had never been this close to discovery, never been cornered so completely. "You don't have to answer now," he said, stepping back slightly. "But you will speak to me, Lyra of the Western Pack. I'm certain of it." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Oh, and Lyra, don't even think about running. There's nowhere in my kingdom where I won't find you." As his footsteps faded, I slid down the wall, glass shards cutting into my palms as I tried to steady myself. After 8 years of careful invisibility, the Alpha King had not only seen me, he had recognized what no one else had managed to discover. My secret was unraveling, and with it, the fragile safety I had constructed, because there was one thing the Alpha King didn't know yet. I hadn't stopped speaking because of trauma from witnessing my pack's slaughter. I had stopped speaking because my voice was the reason they were killed in the first place, and if I broke my silence now, history would inevitably repeat itself. The night after the ceremony, sleep evaded me. I tossed and turned in my narrow bed, phantom echoes of the Alpha King's voice replaying in my mind. "Don't even think about running," as if I hadn't spent 8 years calculating escape routes, memorizing guard rotations, and hoarding small amounts of money. as if I hadn't been running in place this entire time. Dawn broke with cruel swiftness. I rose before the other servants, washing my face in the basin of cold water and securing my hair in a tight bun that would keep it out of the way for my kitchen duties. The wooden pendant hung heavy against my collarbone, a constant reminder of everything I had lost and everything I still stood to lose. The kitchens were already alive with activity when I arrived. Preparations for the week-long celebrations following the presentation ceremony required all hands. I slipped into my usual station, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision, the rhythmic thud of knife against cutting board, drowning out my thoughts. "Lyra?" Mrs. Holloway's voice cut through the kitchen noise. "The Alpha's office sent this for you." She held out a cream-colored envelope sealed with the royal emblem, a wolf's head surrounded by a crown of thorns. My fingers trembled as I took it, leaving damp fingerprints on the expensive paper. "Well, open it," Mrs. Holloway urged, curiosity evident in her pinched expression. I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of parchment inside. The handwriting was bold and slanting. "Lyra of the Western Pack. Your presence is required in my private study at noon today. This is not a request. Alpha King Callum Blackwood." Mrs. Holloway read over my shoulder, her breath catching. "The Alpha's private study? No servant has ever—" She stopped herself, eyeing me with newfound suspicion. "What did you do to attract his attention?" I shrugged helplessly, folding the note and tucking it into my pocket. Around us, the kitchen had gone quiet, all eyes fixed on the mute Omega who had somehow caught the Alpha King's notice. "Well, Mrs. Holloway said briskly, breaking the tension. "You can't go looking like that. Finish those carrots, then go make yourself presentable." Her eyes narrowed. "And remember your place, girl. Whatever the Alpha wants, you give him. Understand?" The implication in her words made my stomach turn. I nodded submissively, keeping my expression neutral even as panic bloomed inside me. If the Alpha King demanded answers, what would I do? 8 years of silence couldn't be broken without consequences. And if he somehow commanded me to speak, would my Omega nature force obedience to an Alpha's direct order? By 11:30, I had changed into my cleanest gray dress, scrubbed my hands raw to remove vegetable stains, and stood before the small cracked mirror in the servants' washroom. The face that looked back at me seemed thin and pale, dark circles shadowing eyes that had seen too much. I touched the scar that ran along my jawline, usually hidden by my hair, a souvenir from the night my pack was slaughtered. The path to the Alpha's private wing was unfamiliar territory. I had cleaned in most parts of the massive stone keep that served as the Northern Pack's headquarters. But the Alpha's personal quarters remained off-limits to ordinary servants. 2 guards flanked the heavy oak doors leading to his wing, their expressions impassive as I approached. "Name and business," the taller one demanded. I held out the note with its broken seal. After inspecting it, he nodded curtly and pushed open one of the doors. "Down the hall, last door on the right. He's waiting." The corridor stretched before me, longer with each step I took. The walls were lined with portraits of previous Alpha Kings, their stern faces following my progress with painted eyes that seemed to know my deception. At the final door, I paused, gathering what little courage remained. 3 quick knocks, soft against the polished wood. "Enter," came his voice from within. The room beyond was not what I expected. Instead of the opulent display of power I had imagined, the Alpha's private study was surprisingly austere. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk dominated the center, scattered with maps and documents. Behind it stood Alpha Callum, his broad shoulders silhouetted against a wall of windows overlooking the northern forests. "Close the door," he said without turning. I obeyed, the soft click of the latch sealing my fate. When he finally faced me, his expression was unreadable. He had changed from his ceremonial attire into a simple black shirt that stretched across his chest, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. "Sit." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. I perched on the edge, hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. He remained standing, studying me with unsettling intensity. "Do you know why I've called you here?" I shook my head slightly, eyes downcast. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," he commanded, and my gaze snapped up automatically, my Omega instincts responding to the Alpha tone. "That's better." He circled the desk slowly, like a predator considering its prey. I've been Alpha King for 5 years, and in that time, I've made it my business to know every wolf under my protection. Especially, he paused, those with unusual circumstances. Stopping directly in front of me, he leaned against the desk, arms crossed. The Western Pack Massacre. Officially, there were no survivors. Yet here you are. My pulse quickened. If he knew that much, what else had he discovered? I've had the records brought from the archives, he continued, reaching behind him to pick up a weathered folder. Fascinating reading. The entire pack slaughtered in one night. 74 wolves killed, including Alpha Darius and his mate. Their bodies were found in the pack house, throats torn out. His eyes never left mine as he spoke the gruesome details, but their youngest daughter was never found. He tossed the folder onto the desk, photos spilling out, charred remains of buildings, bodies covered with sheets, faces I had tried for 8 years to forget. That daughter would be 26 now, he said softly. Your age, Lyra, if that is your real name. I stared at the photos, memories crashing over me in violent waves. The metallic scent of blood, screams echoing through the night. My mother pushing me toward the hidden cellar door. Run, she had whispered. Don't make a sound. Don't ever let them hear your voice. The curious thing, Alpha Callum continued, is that the official report cites an unidentified Omega as the catalyst for the attack. Apparently, this Omega possessed a rare vocal gift, a voice that could compel obedience, even from Alphas. He tilted his head, studying my reaction. A voice so dangerous that rival packs would kill to possess it, or to destroy it. My nails dug crescents into my palms. How had he pieced together this much? The truth about my voice had been the Western Pack's most closely guarded secret. Your hands are bleeding, he observed. I looked down to see small crimson half-moons where my nails had broken skin. Without warning, he knelt before me, taking my hands in his much larger ones. The contact sent a jolt through my system. An Alpha touching an Omega was never casual, never without meaning. His thumbs brushed over the small wounds, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone with such destructive power. What I can't figure out, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is why you're still hiding. The wolves who attacked your pack are long dead. I made sure of that when I took the throne. My eyes widened at this revelation. The rival Alpha who had orchestrated the massacre. Dead. You're safe in my territory, Lyra. No one would dare touch what belongs to me. His words carried a possessive edge that made my Omega instincts both sing and shrink. I pulled my hands from his grasp, standing abruptly. Belong to him? I had spent 8 years ensuring I belonged to no one. He rose to his full height, towering over me. You still don't trust me. It wasn't a question. Fair enough. Trust is earned. He stepped back, giving me space. But I need to know what I'm protecting. If your voice is truly what the legends suggest, it could be either a powerful asset or a dangerous liability to my pack. I shook my head vehemently. My voice was neither. It was a curse, one that had cost my entire pack their lives. You can't remain silent forever, little wolf, he said, his tone softening. Sooner or later you'll have to make a choice. Speak to me willingly or... The unspoken threat hung between us. An Alpha could command an Omega, could force obedience through their biological connection. He could make me speak if he truly wished it. As if reading my thoughts, he smiled grimly. I won't force you. That's not how I rule, but I am running out of patience. A knock at the door interrupted whatever he might have said next. Enter, he called, his eyes still locked with mine. A young beta stepped in, looking nervous. Forgive the interruption, Alpha King, but the delegation from the Eastern Pack has arrived early. They're waiting in the Great Hall. Alpha Callum's jaw tightened. Tell them I'll be there shortly. The beta bowed and retreated, closing the door behind him. The Eastern Pack, Callum muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. Perfect timing as always. He turned back to me. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. Same time. I nodded, relief washing over me at the temporary reprieve. As I turned to leave, His voice stopped me. One more thing, Lyra. He moved toward me with predatory grace. I've assigned new quarters for you. You'll no longer be staying in the servants' wing. Panic flared in my chest. My room in the servants' quarters, small as it was, represented safety, a place where I could disappear, where no one paid attention to the mute Omega. My beta will show you to your new accommodations. Consider it an upgrade, he said, interpreting my alarmed expression. And don't worry. I've placed guards outside your door. For your protection, of course. Protection or imprisonment. The line seemed dangerously blurred. Until tomorrow, little wolf, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the wooden pendant at my throat. Interesting carving. Perhaps you'll tell me its story when you're ready to speak. I backed away from his touch, my hand instinctively covering the pendant. His amber eyes darkened. You can't hide behind silence forever, Lyra. Some truths demand to be spoken. He stepped closer, his scent enveloping me, making my head swim, and I am very, very patient when hunting something valuable. I fled then, dignity forgotten in my desperation to escape his overwhelming presence. But as I hurried down the corridor, his words followed me like shadows. You can't hide forever, and the most terrifying realization was that, for the first time in 8 years, I was beginning to think he might be right. The new quarters were nothing short of a gilded cage. Located in the eastern wing, traditionally reserved for honored guests and high-ranking pack members, the room boasted amenities I hadn't experienced since my childhood in the Western Pack. A 4-poster bed with silk sheets, a private bathroom with steaming hot water, a window seat overlooking the forested mountains. Luxury designed to soften my resistance. As promised, 2 guards stood outside my door. Their presence was explained to others as protection for a special guest of the Alpha King, but I knew better. They were there to ensure I didn't disappear into the night. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares where my voice returned unbidden, destroying everything around me. I woke with the first light, drenched in sweat, my mother's pendant clutched so tightly in my palm that the carved edges left imprints on my skin. A soft knock preceded the entrance of a young beta girl, carrying a breakfast tray and, more surprisingly, a dress that was decidedly not servant's attire. The Alpha King requests you wear this for your meeting, she said, laying out a gown of deep forest green. The material was finer than anything I'd worn in years, the design simple but elegant, with none of the provocative elements typical of Omega presentation attire. I raised an eyebrow in question. He said you'd prefer something modest, the girl explained, a curious expression crossing her face. And practical, though I've never seen an Omega refuse the chance to dress ornately before. Because most Omegas were raised to display themselves, to attract the strongest mate possible. I had been that way once, before I learned how dangerous attraction could be. After she left, I approached the dress cautiously, as if it might bite. The Alpha's ability to discern my preferences was unsettling. Had he been watching me that closely? Or was it simply that he understood what it meant to hide in plain sight? I bathed thoroughly, scrubbing away the lingering scent of fear from the night's terrors. The dress fit perfectly, another disturbing detail. How had he known my measurements? The soft material fell to my ankles, the sleeves long enough to cover the scars on my forearms, the neckline modest but flattering. I left my hair loose, letting it curtain my face, a small act of defiance, another layer of concealment. At precisely noon, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find not a guard, but Alpha Callum himself, casually leaning against the doorframe. He wore no ceremonial trappings today, just dark trousers and a charcoal shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. The effect was oddly more intimidating than his formal regalia. "The dress suits you," he said by way of greeting. His eyes traveled over me, not with the leering assessment I'd come to expect from Alphas, but with something more complex, appreciation mixed with calculation. "Though I see you're still hiding behind your hair." I touched the dark strands self-consciously, resisting the urge to tuck them behind my ear. "Walk with me," he said, offering his arm in a courtly gesture that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. I hesitated, eyeing the empty corridor behind him. "The guards have been dismissed," he explained. "This conversation requires privacy." Reluctantly, I placed my hand in the crook of his elbow, hyper-aware of the warmth radiating through the fabric of his shirt. He led me not back to his study, but through a series of corridors I had never entered before, eventually stopping at a heavy iron door guarded by a weathered old beta with a ring of ancient keys. "Good afternoon, Jensen," Alpha Callum greeted him. "Alpha King." The old man bowed deeply, his rheumy eyes flickering curiously to me before returning to his master. "The archives are prepared as you requested." "Thank you. We are not to be disturbed." Jensen unlocked the door with a key that seemed larger and more ornate than the others on his ring. "Of course, Alpha. Call if you require anything." Beyond the door lay a circular chamber lined with shelves containing scrolls, books, and artifacts, the historical heart of the Northern Pack. The air smelled of aged paper and preservation spells, reminding me painfully of my father's library. He had been the Western Pack's historian before he was murdered. Alpha Callum closed the door behind us, the heavy thud echoing in the silent space. "Few people are granted access to these archives," he said, moving to a table at the center where several items were already laid out. "What I'm about to show you has been kept secret for generations." I approached cautiously, curious despite my apprehension. On the table lay an ancient leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age, and beside it, a carved wooden box inlaid with silver. Alpha Callum opened the book to a marked page, turning it toward me. "The Prophecy of Voices," he said, watching my reaction closely. "Written 300 years ago by a seer of the Northern Pack." I leaned forward, scanning the faded text. The ancient language was similar to what my father had taught me as a child, but with regional variations. I could make out phrases: voice of command, Omega born of royal blood, bridge between worlds. "You can read it," he observed, surprise evident in his tone. "The old language isn't commonly taught anymore, especially not to Omegas," I shrugged, offering no explanation. "The prophecy speaks of an Omega with a voice that can compel truth, inspire loyalty, and command even the strongest Alpha," he continued. "This Omega was predicted to appear during the time of fractured packs and would either unite the wolf nations or destroy them completely." His amber eyes locked with mine. "Sound familiar?" I stepped back, my hands trembling slightly. The prophecy described my curse with uncomfortable accuracy. "For generations, packs have searched for this Omega," he said, closing the book carefully. "Some, like the Eastern Pack, sought to control this power. Others, fearing it, sought to destroy it." He paused. "And then there was your father's approach." My head snapped up at the mention of my father. "Alpha Darius of the Western Pack," Callum continued, "was known for his scholarly nature. When rumors reached him that his youngest daughter possessed the voice of the prophecy, he did something unprecedented. He reached for the wooden box. He sought to understand it. He opened the box, revealing a stack of leather journals. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately, my heart constricting painfully at the sight. "Your father documented everything, the first manifestation of your abilities, the techniques he developed to help you control them, the protective measures he implemented to keep you safe." Alpha Callum picked up the topmost journal. "I recovered these after I eliminated the Eastern Alpha who orchestrated the attack on your pack. They've been here ever since, waiting for their rightful owner." I reached out hesitantly, my fingers hovering over my father's journals. How had they survived when everything else had been destroyed? "Take them," Callum said softly. "They belong to you." I lifted the top journal, running my fingers over the familiar script. My father had been methodical in his documentation, recording every detail of my unusual development from the moment my voice first compelled an Alpha guard to release me from punishment when I was 7 years old. "Your father believed your voice wasn't a weapon to be feared or exploited," Callum said, watching me leaf through the pages. "He saw it as a gift that, properly understood, could bring positive change." I closed the journal, clutching it to my chest. My father's theories had died with him, or so I had believed. The possibility that his work survived, that his understanding of my voice might offer an alternative to eternal silence, was overwhelming. "I've spent 5 years searching for you," Callum admitted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Not because I fear your power or wish to control it, but because I believe your father was right. The packs are fractured, Lyra. Old rivalries, territory disputes, resource competitions. We're destroying ourselves from within. He moved closer, his scent enveloping me, that intoxicating blend of pine and smoke that made my Omega instincts strain toward him despite my fear. I need your help to unite them, he said, before we lose everything our ancestors built. I shook my head vehemently. My voice had brought nothing but destruction. How could he possibly believe it could create unity? You don't believe me, he said, reading my expression. That's understandable. You've spent 8 years associating your voice with death and loss. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face with unexpected gentleness. But what if everything you believed about that night was wrong? I stepped back, confusion washing over me. What could he possibly know that I didn't? I had been there. I had heard the screams, smelled the blood, felt the heat of flames consuming my home. The attack on your pack wasn't because of your voice, he said, his expression grave. It was because of what your father discovered about it, information that threatened the power structure of all wolf packs. He gestured to the journals. Your father found historical evidence that the voice of command wasn't limited to a single Omega. It was once a common trait among all Omegas, bred out deliberately by Alphas who feared losing control. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. If true, it meant the entire hierarchy of wolf society, Alphas commanding, Betas serving, Omegas submitting, was not natural law, but engineered suppression. Your existence threatens those who benefit from the current order, Callum continued. That's why the Eastern Alpha moved against your pack. Not because your voice was dangerous, but because the truth about it was. I sank into a nearby chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. 8 years of guilt, believing my voice had brought death to everyone I loved, wavered under this new perspective. I know this is difficult to process, he said, kneeling before me so our eyes were level. But I need you to consider something, Lyra. What if your silence isn't protecting anyone? What if it's exactly what those who fear change want? His words penetrated the armor I had built around myself. For 8 years, I had believed my silence was my penance, my protection against causing more harm. But what if it was actually my prison? What if my refusal to speak had never been an act of strength, but of fear? I'm not asking you to trust me completely, Callum said, his voice gentling. Just enough to consider that there might be another path forward, one where your voice becomes a force for healing rather than destruction. He reached for my hand, his touch sending warmth cascading through my body. Will you at least think about it? I nodded slowly, still clutching my father's journal like a lifeline. Good. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his stern features into something unexpectedly vulnerable. That's all I ask for now. As he helped me gather the journals, his fingers occasionally brushed against mine, each contact sending small shocks through my system. The Alpha King was nothing like I had imagined, not the power-hungry tyrant I had feared, but something far more dangerous, a wolf with vision and conviction, one who saw me not as a threat to be neutralized or a prize to be claimed, but as an equal partner in creating change. One more thing, he said as we prepared to leave the archives. The Eastern Pact delegation is here to discuss a potential alliance. Their new Alpha, Rowan, is... He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Politically motivated. He's heard rumors of an Omega with unusual abilities in my territory. Fear gripped me. The Eastern Pact, the same pack responsible for the slaughter of my family. He doesn't know it's you, Callum assured me, reading my panic. But he's suspicious. I've arranged for you to attend tonight's formal dinner, not as a servant, but as my personal guest. I shook my head frantically. To be displayed before the very wolves who had destroyed everything I loved was unthinkable. Listen to me, Lyra, he said, taking my shoulders gently. I know I'm asking a lot, but I need to gauge Rowan's reaction to you. If he recognizes you as Darius's daughter, if he shows any sign of knowing about your abilities, it confirms my suspicions about continued Eastern Pact involvement in suppressing the truth. His logic was sound, but terror still coursed through me at the thought of facing my enemies. "I won't let anyone harm you," he promised, his voice dropping to a growl that vibrated with alpha protection. "You'll be under my direct protection, seated at my side. No one would dare touch you there." I bit my lip, indecision warring within me. Everything in me wanted to flee, to return to the safety of anonymity. But a small voice, one that sounded remarkably like my mother's, whispered that running had never truly made me safe, only hidden. "Trust me," Callum said, his eyes holding mine. "Just for tonight." After a long moment, I nodded, accepting both his plan and the terrible vulnerability that came with it. "Thank you," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I know what this costs you." As we left the archives, journals carefully packed in a leather satchel he insisted on carrying for me, I realized something had fundamentally shifted between us. I wasn't just the mute Omega hiding among servants anymore, and he wasn't just the Alpha King to be feared and avoided. We had become conspirators, bound by dangerous knowledge and mutual need. Whether that bond would be my salvation or my downfall remained to be seen. But for the first time in 8 years, I allowed myself to consider a future where silence was a choice rather than a necessity. A future where my voice might heal instead of destroy. It was a dangerous hope, but once awakened, impossible to silence again. The hours before the formal dinner passed in a blur of preparation and rising anxiety. A team of Beta attendants arrived at my quarters, bearing cosmetics, jewelry, and yet another dress. This one a midnight blue that shimmered with subtle silver threads when it caught the light. Unlike the practical green dress from earlier, this gown was clearly designed to make a statement. Royal without being ostentatious, beautiful without being overtly seductive. The Alpha King selected it personally, one of the attendants mentioned as she styled my hair, twisting the dark strands into an elegant arrangement that left my face exposed. No hiding tonight. He rarely takes such interest in a guest's appearance. The other attendants exchanged meaningful glances, their sense betraying curiosity mingled with jealousy. I kept my expression neutral, though inwardly I trembled at what those looks implied. The Alpha King's special attention would not go unnoticed or uncommented upon. As the final preparations concluded, I studied my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman who stared back seemed like a stranger, poised, elegant, her eyes bright with apprehension, but no longer hollow with despair. My hand reached instinctively for my mother's pendant, but it was hidden beneath the high neckline of the gown, a secret comfort against my skin. A knock at the door announced Alpha Callum's arrival. The attendants hastily curtsied and scattered as he entered, his presence immediately filling the room. He had dressed formally for the occasion in a black suit accented with silver that complemented my gown, the effect clearly intentional. A visible partnership. He stopped short when he saw me, something flashing in his amber eyes that made my breath catch. "You look," he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "The Eastern Pack won't know what hit them." I allowed a small smile at that, appreciating that he had framed my transformation as strategic rather than merely aesthetic. "Are you ready?" he asked, offering his arm. I hesitated, then nodded, placing my hand on his forearm. His muscles tensed beneath my touch, a reminder of the raw power contained within his controlled exterior. "Remember," he said as we moved toward the door, "you're under my protection tonight. No one can touch you without going through me first." His voice dropped lower, a rumble that seemed to vibrate through me. "And no one gets through me." The walk to the Great Hall felt like marching toward execution. Servants stopped to stare as we passed, whispering behind their hands. Guards straightened to attention, their eyes widening in recognition. Not of me, but of what my position at the Alpha King's side represented. At the massive double doors leading to the Great Hall, Callum paused, turning to face me. "One last thing," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I had this made for you." He withdrew a delicate silver chain with a small pendant, a wolf carved from moonstone, its form echoing the wooden one from my mother but wrought in precious materials. "May I?" he asked, holding it up. I nodded, turning so he could fasten it around my neck. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin at my nape, sending shivers down my spine. The moonstone wolf settled just below my collarbone, catching the light with each breath. A reminder, he said softly, that you are not alone anymore. Before I could process the emotions his gesture evoked, the doors swung open, and we were announced to the waiting crowd. Alpha King Callum Blackwood of the Northern United Pax, the herald proclaimed, and his honored guest, Lady Lyra. The title startled me. Lady Lyra, not Lyra the servant, not Lyra the mute Omega. The fabricated status was another layer of protection, I realized, another piece of Callum's strategy. The great hall fell silent as we entered, hundreds of eyes turning to assess this unexpected development. I kept my chin high, my expression carefully composed, despite the hurricane of anxiety whirling inside me. Callum's hand covered mine where it rested on his arm, a subtle reminder of his presence. We proceeded to the high table positioned on a dais at the far end of the hall. Seated there already were the visiting dignitaries, 5 wolves whose scents marked them as Eastern Pack. My steps faltered slightly as we approached, old terrors threatening to overwhelm my composure. Callum's hand tightened over mine. "I'm right here," he murmured, so softly only I could hear. At the center of the Eastern delegation sat Alpha Rowan, younger than I expected, perhaps 35, with sharp features and calculating green eyes that assessed me with undisguised interest as we approached. His scent carried notes of clove and something metallic, like blood. "Alpha Callum," he greeted, rising from his seat. "You've been holding out on us. When you mentioned a special guest, we had no idea you'd been hiding such a treasure in your territory." The possessive edge in his voice made my skin crawl, but I maintained my placid expression, my eyes slightly downcast in the traditional Omega greeting posture. "Lady Lyra is not a treasure to be hidden or displayed," Callum replied, his tone pleasant but undercut with steel. "She is an honored advisor and under my personal protection." Advisor. The fabrication surprised me, but I kept my reaction hidden, allowing Callum to seat me to his right, the position of highest honor. "An advisor?" Alpha Rowan's eyebrow arched skeptically. "How progressive of you to value an Omega's counsel so highly." His gaze shifted to me, assessing. "And a mute one at that. The rumors have reached even our territory." "Lady Lyra communicates quite effectively when she chooses," Callum replied smoothly. "Her silence is selective, not limiting." The implication that I chose when to speak rather than couldn't speak at all was a dangerous gamble. I shot Callum a warning glance, which he answered with an almost imperceptible nod. He knew exactly what he was doing, baiting Rowan, watching for reactions that might reveal knowledge of my true identity. "Fascinating," Rowan murmured, his focus intensifying. "She reminds me of someone, an old ally of my predecessor. Alpha Darius of the Western Pack had a daughter with similar coloring." My heart stuttered, but I kept my breathing even, reaching for my water goblet to hide the slight tremor in my hands. "The Western Pack was decimated 8 years ago," Callum observed, signaling for the first course to be served. "A tragedy still shrouded in mystery." "Indeed," Rowan agreed, his eyes never leaving my face. "Though some say it was necessary preventative action." "Preventative?" Callum's voice remained conversational, but I felt him tense beside me. What threat could an entire pack of women and children have posed? Rowan smiled thinly. "Sometimes the greatest threats come in the most unassuming packages." His gaze flicked to me again. "Wouldn't you agree, Lady Lyra?" I offered a non-committal smile in response, but internally my thoughts raced. He knew. Perhaps not with certainty, but he suspected my identity and what it meant. The dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness, each course accompanied by careful political maneuvering disguised as pleasant conversation. Throughout it all, Rowan watched me, his predatory attention barely concealed behind diplomatic pleasantries. Midway through the main course, he leaned forward, addressing me directly. "I'm curious, Lady Lyra, how did you come to advise Alpha Callum? It's such an unusual position for an Omega." Callum began to answer for me, but Rowan raised his hand. "I'd like to hear from the lady herself." His smile turned challenging, or at least, see how she communicates so effectively without words. A test. He was pushing, trying to force a reaction, perhaps even trying to compel me to speak. I reached for the notepad and pen that had been thoughtfully placed beside my setting. Slowly, deliberately, I wrote a response and passed it to Callum. He read it aloud. "Some truths require no voice to be understood." And his eyes met mine, a flash of admiration in their depths before he turned back to Rowan. "As you can see, Lady Lyra has no difficulty making her points clear." Rowan's expression darkened momentarily before he composed himself. "Quite clever. Though I wonder—" He reached across the table suddenly, his fingers closing around my wrist. What would happen if she were startled into speaking? Before I could react, Callum's hand shot out, gripping Rowan's arm with enough force to make the Eastern Alpha wince. "You forget yourself," Callum said, his voice deadly quiet. "Touch her again without permission, and you'll return to your territory with one less hand than you arrived with." The hall fell silent, the tension palpable as the two alphas locked eyes in silent challenge. After a long moment, Rowan released my wrist, forcing a laugh. "Merely curious, Alpha Callum. No offense intended." "None taken," Callum replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "As long as we understand each other." The remainder of the dinner passed in strained politeness, but I could feel Rowan's anger simmering beneath the surface. When the final course was cleared, Callum stood, offering me his hand. "If you'll excuse us," he addressed the gathering, "Lady Lyra and I have matters to discuss before tomorrow's council meeting." We exited with deliberate calm, but once we were safely in the corridor outside, Callum's composure fractured. He pulled me into an alcove, his hands gripping my shoulders as he searched my face. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his furrowed brow. I nodded, though my heart still raced from the confrontation. "He knows," Callum said grimly. "Not everything, perhaps, but enough to be dangerous." His jaw clenched. "I should never have exposed you to this." I shook my head, reaching up to touch his face, a gesture of reassurance that surprised us both. His eyes widened slightly at the contact, his breath catching. "Lyra," he began, then stopped as footsteps approached. One of his beta guards appeared, looking apologetic for the interruption. "Alpha King, forgive me, but there's been an incident. The Eastern delegation's guards are arguing with ours over security protocols for tomorrow's meeting." Callum growled in frustration. "I'll handle it. Escort Lady Lyra to her quarters and double the guard. No one enters without my explicit permission." The beta bowed. "Yes, Alpha." Callum turned back to me. "Wait for me. We need to talk. About Rowan. About your safety." He hesitated. "About us." Us. The word hung in the air between us, laden with implications neither of us had been ready to acknowledge until now. I nodded, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. "I won't be long," he promised, then strode away, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. The beta guard led me through a series of back corridors designed to avoid the main halls where guests might linger. Despite the precaution, we turned a corner and found ourselves face to face with Alpha Rowan and two of his guards. "Lady Lyra?" he greeted, his smile not reaching his cold green eyes. What a fortunate encounter. I was hoping for a private word. The beta beside me stepped forward protectively. "The Alpha King has ordered Lady Lyra to her quarters. Any discussions can wait until tomorrow." Of course," Rowan said smoothly. "Just one small matter that can't wait." He gestured dismissively to the beta. "Leave us." "I cannot, Alpha Rowan. My orders. Were given by your Alpha, not mine." Rowan cut in, his voice suddenly resonating with Alpha command. "Leave. Us, now." The beta struggled visibly, caught between conflicting Alpha orders, but the proximity of Rowan's direct command won out. With an apologetic glance at me, he backed away, leaving me alone with Rowan and his men. "Finally," Rowan said, his pleasant mask dropping. "The mysterious Lady Lyra." He circled me slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. "Or should I call you by your real name, Lyra of the Western Pack, daughter of Alpha Darius?" I kept my expression neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "My predecessor was a fool," Rowan continued. "He should have made certain all of Darius's bloodline was eliminated, a messy oversight I intend to correct." He stepped closer, his scent overwhelming, cloves and metal and something rotten underneath. Unless, of course, you prove more valuable alive than dead. I backed away, but his guards moved to block my retreat. I know what you are, Rowan whispered, his face inches from mine. What your voice can do, the last true Omega voice. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my throat, not squeezing but threatening. Speak for me, Lyra. Demonstrate your power, and I might let you live as my mate instead of my trophy. Fear and fury coursed through me in equal measure. 8 years of hiding, of silence, of believing my voice was a curse that had destroyed everything I loved. And here stood living proof that the destruction had never been my fault at all. It had been wolves like Rowan, afraid of losing their power, willing to slaughter innocents to maintain the hierarchy that benefited them. My father's journals flashed through my mind, his careful documentation proving that what made me special had once been the birthright of all Omegas, bred out through generations of controlled mating. Rowan's fingers tightened slightly. Speak, he commanded. Something shifted inside me. Not submission to his command, but the shattering of chains I had placed on myself. My voice wasn't a curse. It was my birthright, my power, my truth. I met his eyes directly, no longer cowering, and opened my mouth. Let me go. The words emerged rusty from disuse, but resonated with power that had been building for 8 years of silence. They vibrated with something ancient and undeniable, not just alpha command, but something deeper, more primal. Rowan's hand fell away from my throat immediately, his eyes widening in shock as his body obeyed against his will. His guards stepped back similarly, confusion evident on their faces. It's true, Rowan breathed, a mixture of fear and avarice crossing his features. The Omega voice. I straightened to my full height, feeling power flow through me, not the destructive force I had feared all these years, but something healing, restorative, balancing. You will never touch me again, I said, each word stronger than the last. You will never harm another Omega. You will return to your territory and begin dismantling the systems that oppress those you consider beneath you. Rowan struggled visibly against the compulsion of my words, but his body began turning away, his guards following suit as if pulled by invisible strings. This isn't over, he snarled over his shoulder, fighting every step. Your voice may command, but my armies will stand down, came Callum's voice from behind me, deep with fury. He stepped to my side, his expression thunderous as he looked from Rowan to me. By the authority of the Northern Alliance and the ancient laws of Wolfkind, I charge Alpha Rowan with attempted assault on a protected guest and conspiracy against the Western Pack. Guards poured into the corridor, Callum's elite force, not the regular palace guards. Arrest them, Callum ordered, all 3. As his men moved to comply, Callum turned to me, his eyes wide with wonder. You spoke, he said softly. For my ears alone. I nodded, my hand rising to my throat, the sensation of words still foreign after so many years of silence. Are you hurt? He asked, his gaze searching for any sign of injury. I shook my head. No, I whispered, the single word still feeling strange on my tongue. His hand reached for mine, entwining our fingers. I heard your voice, he said, awe evident in his tone. It's even more remarkable than the legend suggested. It's not a weapon, I said carefully, each word deliberate. It's a gift. My father was right. I know, Callum replied, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. A gift that could heal the rifts between packs, restore balance to our kind. He paused, his eyes holding mine. If you choose to use it, choice. Not compulsion, not expectation, not duty, choice. I need time, I said, the words coming more easily now. To understand what this means, what I can do with it. You'll have it, he promised. All the time you need. His expression softened. But not alone, unless that's what you want. I studied his face. The strength there, yes, but also compassion, integrity, vision. An alpha who sought not to dominate but to protect, not to control, but to elevate, not alone. I agreed softly. Later that night, After Rowan and his conspirators had been secured in the palace dungeons awaiting judgment from the Council of Alphas, Callum and I stood on the balcony outside my quarters, looking out over the moonlit forests. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice growing stronger with each use, like a muscle long atrophied finally regaining its strength. "That depends on you," Callum replied, turning to face me. "The packs need healing, Lyra. They need to remember what balance truly means. Not alphas dominating, but all three designations working in harmony, each with their own strengths. And you think my voice can achieve that?" "I think your voice is the key that unlocks the possibility," he said. "But the work, that would be for all of us." I touched the wooden pendant at my throat, my mother's last gift, and then the moonstone wolf that Callum had given me. Past and future, loss and possibility. "My mother told me that words are power," I said softly. "That sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to hold them back." "Wise advice," Callum acknowledged. "But perhaps now is the time to speak, to use that power for healing rather than hiding." He stepped closer, his scent enveloping me, pine and smoke, and something uniquely him that called to me on a level beyond rational thought. "I have no right to ask this," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "but I want you by my side, Lyra. Not as a weapon or a tool, not even just as an advisor." His hand reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "As my partner, my equal, my mate, if you'll have me." 8 years ago, I had run from the possibility of being claimed, seeing it only as another form of control. But this was different. This was a choice freely offered and freely taken. "I don't need an answer now," he added quickly. "I meant what I said about giving you time." I smiled, truly smiled for the first time in years. "Some answers don't require time," I said, reaching up to touch his face. "Only courage." When our lips met, it felt like coming home, like finding a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing. His arms encircled me, strong but gentle, protective without possessing. "My voice is for truth," I whispered against his lips. "And the truth is, I choose you, Callum Blackwood. Not because you're an alpha or a king, but because you saw me when I was invisible, heard me when I was silent, and valued me when I thought I was broken." His forehead rested against mine, his breath warm on my face. "You were never broken, Lyra, just waiting for the right moment to speak your truth." As the moon rose higher over the forests of the northern pack, I realized that what I had feared for so long, my voice, my nature, my power, had never been a curse at all. It had been a gift waiting for the right time, the right purpose, the right partner to help me wield it. 8 years of silence had not been wasted. They had been preparation for this moment, when speaking would matter most. Not just for me, but for all Omegas who had lost their voices over generations of suppression. It was time to speak, time to heal, time to restore balance. And this time, my voice would not bring destruction, but transformation.